Fans, welcome to the Blue White Breakdown. It is a Thursday afternoon. You know what that means? It means myself, Max, Ralph, and Johnny McGonigal over there beside me are going live on YouTube for all of you to come join us and listen in on what we know is going to be a pretty sizable, perhaps lengthy, probably heated show discussion here today on the Blue White Breakdown. Johnny, look, it's just been an absolute whirlwind of a week for Penn State. It's been a whirlwind of, I believe we are on day 53 of the head coaching search right now since James Franklin was fired on October 12th. And we have just about as much clarity right now as we did the Monday after he was fired in October. It's just, this thing has taken so many turns. National Signing Day happened on Wednesday, and that went pretty much as expected after how all of this transpired. But there are some layers to that we want to dive into. Johnny, there's just a lot going on. But let's check in first. How we feeling? I personally, yesterday after handling National Signing Day, I got my Christmas tree up in my apartment. So tis the season.
My girlfriend and I also got ours up as well. Yeah,
Nice.
we put it up a couple nights ago.
Yeah.
I guess that was. Let me see. So today's Thursday. I think we put it up on Tuesday night. So that was after Kalani Sitake already declined Penn State.
Okay.
I was trying to remember where it was on the Sitake timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been that kind of week, man. That kind of week. You said signing day happened yesterday. Did it really? Obviously a lot of Penn State players following James Franklin of Virginia Tech. We'll get into that. We'll get into the two guys that Penn State did get in the class so far. But really, the talk of this week has been the coaching search, the mishandling of it all by Pat Kraft, the AD, Penn State overall. And there is a lot to get into in terms of what already happened and what comes next for this football program, for this coaching search, for this university.
Yeah, so for everybody listening in, we are live. We'll try and take some questions here throughout, but we've got a jam-packed schedule of things we want to get to. And Johnny, as you mentioned, let's start with Kalani Sitake, the sitting BYU head coach, who was that mystery man who, I think Pat Kraft and Penn State were all over Mike Elko for a few weeks in the regular season. Then he signed that extension, and there was talk of Kalen DeBoer and all these other names coming out, but it turns out Sitake was kind of the man who they were trying to keep quiet. You can understand why, because of the way that the BYU donor base, fan base reacted when his name came out, and how this thing ultimately turned out with the fact that he got a long-term extension, got more money for his assistants, and is now staying in Provo. He is not going to be Penn State's head coach, despite their appearingly being like a plan in place for him to come here after the Big 12 championship this weekend. And I think, like, if Pat Kraft could have pulled it off, I personally think that would have been a really solid hire. I mean, for what is out there, for what is possible, I think it's good. But I also think with the way it blew up in his face, you have to kind of have some foresight and say, like, well, I'm trying to poach a guy who played at BYU, has been coaching there for 10 years, and is just absolutely adored by the community. Like, I don't know. I understand, like, he almost pulled it off, which is impressive in its own right. But the fact that it turned out this way, I don't think should be ultimately all that surprising, and is kind of a reflection of how this coaching search has gone.
Yeah. Looking back on it now, we can say it was a miscalculation, perhaps a foolish miscalculation for Pat Kraft to think that he could pull Kalani Sitake away from BYU. But he was confident that it would happen, and CBS Sports during the will he, won't he phase of this, I believe that would have been Monday night, reported that Penn State felt like they basically had a deal in place with Sitake, and that was my understanding of it as well. And it's not like this just popped up out of nowhere for Pat Kraft and for Penn State. It might have, in terms of and it certainly did, in terms of the national reporting around this, him being identified by Pete Thamel and a bunch of other outlets, as the top target. Well, like, Pat Kraft had been working on this for a while. Like you said, once that went out the door, Sitake was kind of his guy. And honestly, I can see both of those guys getting on really well in terms of how Sitake carries himself, and not just as a coach, but as a people person, as a motivator, as XYZ. I think the only concern would have been the lack of East Coast experience, really beyond like Utah and Arizona. But if this guy was coaching in the Northeast, he would have been Penn State's #1 target, slam dunk hire from the very beginning. Obviously, it didn't happen, right? And a part of that is BYU rallying the forces. They were going up against a church and a cookie mogul, for in terms of money, scrounging together money, and not just for Sitake in terms of a contract, but like you mentioned, assistant coach pool, NIL resources, all that kind of stuff. But also, it's just and this is where the miscalculation might come in. It's that, like you mentioned, you're going up against a church, like a guy who not only went to BYU and played for BYU, but a guy who was so deeply rooted in that community, in the LDS church community. Like, that is really difficult to overcome. And Pat Kraft thought that they did that. Penn State thought that they did that. They thought that they had it done. They were preparing to introduce this guy. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And in the process, and I know we'll talk about other candidates very shortly, because I'm sure with how quickly this moved along and all happened, like for Penn State fans on Monday, it was like, oh, Kalani Sitake, oh my God. And then like you had to kind of convince yourself, because you're like, oh, BYU's coach, for some people who might be uninitiated with how good of a coach he is. And then by the time he got sold, fans started selling themselves on him, like he was gone. So, as quickly as that moved along, we'll move along and talk about where Penn State goes next. But it's worth like hammering home the point that like Penn State thought it had its guy, and it did not. It ultimately did not. He is still at BYU, and they kind of lost Bob Chesney because of it. At least that's my understanding. I think your understanding of it as well. Like Bob Chesney, JMU's coach, Pennsylvania native, was a part of this process, and ultimately couldn't wait any longer. And Penn State thought they had Sitake, and Bob Chesney goes and takes the UCLA job. And from my understanding, that contract is signed, even though it hasn't been announced yet by UCLA. Maybe Penn State decides to get back in on it. Who knows? But it was a brutal day, honestly, like a brutal day for Pat Kraft, a brutal development for Penn State's coaching staff, and one that Penn State fans understandably were frustrated, angry, and frankly embarrassed by.
Yeah, it's just crazy how quickly all of this happened and fell apart, because on Monday, Bob and I recorded a podcast, and that's when Chesney kind of got reported as the expectation he was going to UCLA. Obviously, still hasn't been officially announced, but like it's a done deal. He's going to UCLA. There is no chance for Penn State to pull him away. I'm under the impression of that, at least. But Bob and I are recording a podcast, and we're talking about like, well, did Pat Kraft kind of let one go here? Like we were operating under the assumption his name had not come out yet. We were operating under the assumption that his guy was Kalani Sitake. But on the podcast, that's what I said. Like, Bob Chesney was such an easy sell for Penn State and Pat Kraft. The PA native worked his way up the ranks, like embraced the transfer portal. He had all these things that whether or not you loved him in the coaching process, you've gotten to a point where your top guy, your second guy, maybe even your third and fourth guys were gone and not options anymore. If you got to look for a way to just get people happy and get people in the building happy, Bob Chesney would have been such an easy sell to donors, to fans, to whoever you want it to be. And that's off the board now too. So it's just, where do you go? And I got to say, we know James Franklin very well for being in Happy Valley for so long, but my God, putting the Crumble Cookies out at the signing day celebration yesterday, for those of you who don't know what I'm referencing, there were Crumble Cookies at Virginia Tech's recruiting day lounge over in Blacksburg. And obviously the Crumble Cookie CEO is a huge BYU donor and played a pretty significant hand, I think, in getting Kalani Sitake to stay in Provo. And the pettiness is just like why we love college football. They claimed that they've been doing that forever. I don't know.
Max. Yeah. So James Franklin interviewed with, and as all these coaches do on signing day, they go on a bunch of different national outlets and talk about their classes. And James Franklin was a big storyline yesterday in terms of flipping the number of commits he did from Penn State and just generally putting together the recruiting class that he did at Virginia Tech. He did an interview with CBS Sports and he was saying, we always have Crumble Cookies every year at Penn State. Do you ever remember the war room at the Lash building being stocked with Crumble Cookies?
No, I don't recall it off the top of my head.
I mean, it might have. Like, I'm not calling the guy a liar, but we do know that James can be petty. So I wouldn't put it past them. Either way, the optics alone, whether it was intended or not, from a neutral observer, must have been hilarious. For Penn State fans, must have been really come on, dude. I must say this morning, I did drive by a Crumble Cookies shop. And I had never seen it there before. Okay. I had never seen it there before, but today I saw it because my brain is just wired to think of Crumble Cookies now.
Yeah, maybe a couple of people in State College went and put some Crumble Cookies on the doorstep of the athletic administration building where Pat Kraft's office is too, which I thought was pretty funny.
I think that was like a DoorDash order from a BYU fan.
Yeah,
is what I saw on social media.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, college football, man, we love it for a lot of reasons. So the pettiness.
One semi-serious note on this, on the Crumble Cookies end of this before we move on.
Is any of it serious?
A little bit is, because, and it was just a small part of a column I put together after Sitake fell apart. It was just on the 24 hours that was the coaching search, everything that goes along with it. And we'll talk more in depth about Pat Kraft in a bit. But on this point, from Penn State standpoint, from Pat Kraft's standpoint, from the administration standpoint, they thought they had their guy and it fell through. The greater college football landscape, will not remember that. They won't remember, honestly, Kalani Sitake going back on a handshake agreement. They will remember, Penn State, this massive program, losing out to the CEO of Crumble Cookies. That's how that will be remembered. And perception is reality in this sport. And it was just I know it's a joke, but it's also just kind of adds to the embarrassment and adds to the bad look that was, Monday going into Tuesday.
Yeah, absolutely, Johnny. So I'm keeping one eye on Twitter, and just in case whatever happens today, the all Big Ten teams are being announced. It is far from the focus of our show today, but Katron Allen did make the first team, and so did Vanga Ioane, which I think are very well deserved. Emmett Johnson of Nebraska took home Running Back of the Year award. Look, we saw him in person, good player. Yeah, Katron Allen was unbelievable this year. I don't know.
Yeah, Katron should have won Running Back of the Year. But I mean, good for him for being first team. Good for Venga for being first team. Yeah. Obviously not the focus of the pod, but at the same time, don't want to ignore that either. So good for those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Penn State's defense and special teams didn't place anybody higher than the third team, which personally I thought Amari Campbell had an argument for second or even first team. Guy played really well this year, but I don't think any of that is all that surprising. As I said, Johnny, not the focus of the pod. So let's get to another piece of this kind of breaking down with Sitake. It seemed as though the quick pivot was Jeff Brom, Louisville. A lot of people were talking about Brian Hartline, Ohio State offensive coordinator, but I think really through this whole process, his name has been popular, and at no point was it really real. I mean, they might have talked to him or his representation, but just it wasn't the idea. Pat Kraft has always wanted a sitting head coach, someone with head coach experience. That's what this was. Hartline went to USF, but an interesting study from On3 came out. Coaches who had been linked to Penn State in some way during this 53 days of coaching search have amassed $370 million in extensions. I mean, there are a number of names that have been connected to this search, but not that many. These guys are getting paid, and it's all because of the Penn State job opening. And I think that that's a reminder, at least, maybe Pat Kraft has overplayed his hand here. Maybe this hasn't gone very well, but it's at least reassurance, I guess, for fans to say like, yeah, Penn State's a good job because other teams are scrambling to try and keep their guy away from it. Like
if that's a spin you want,
I'm not saying that's my spin. I'm just offering that potential.
Sure, no, totally fair. Yeah, I mentioned the Crumble Cookies bit being the thing people remember from the Sitake deal. Like ultimately, what could be the lasting legacy of this coaching search, which again, as you mentioned, Max, has dragged on 50 plus days, is that Penn State's opening is making a lot of money for a lot of coaches. It was going to be one of these jobs, whether it was LSU, Florida, Auburn, and some of the guys who had Penn State's eye or at least interest or like at least could have positioned themselves as being in the mix to get those extensions also were in the mix or at least in talks with those other jobs. But you look at it, I mean, right off the bat, it was Kurt Cignetti, Matt Rule, Eli Drinkowitz. I'm surprised that he ultimately stayed at Missouri through all of this. But he gets an extension there. Jeff Brom being the most recent one. You had Clark Lee. I'm missing one. A big one, Mike Elko was the big one I'm missing. But Jeff Brom focusing in more on like the present or at least like the last 48 hours, 24 hours. Jeff Brom was involved, I would say, like early in the process, but very much put on the back burner when Elko came to the fore and then Sitake came to the fore. And so that's one where like that felt like hey, like, we can circle back. I know that at least the reporting I know from Sports Illustrated on it was that he turned down overtures and terms to a deal. That is how it's being perceived right now. Brom certainly was an option, and he certainly leveraged that interest into staying in Louisville. But I think he was kind of always like felt like that was going to be the path for him, just like Brian Hartline going to a program of South Florida's level. Always felt like that was going to be the end result for Brian Hartline, despite some fans really being enamored with him. And then just kind of a broader point on the Brom deal. Think of the number of coaches that have been targeted that ultimately stay at their alma mater.
Yep.
And that's one where it's Lee, it's Brom, it's obviously Sitake. Like there's a lot of these coaches who have strong ties to their universities already and were already going to be difficult to be pulled from.
Yeah, I think that's where you can have issue with the way Pat Kraft has gone about this. I mean, Elko was a great target. He is a good football coach and a guy that you maybe could have pulled away with the right deal, but Texas A&M had enough money and said, no, he's our guy. We want him, and matched it. I think that was fine. Again, credit to Kraft for even like getting the Sitake deal close to the finish line, because that would have been a coup. But it didn't happen. And you start to wonder, like, okay, is he really targeting the right guys here? Like, I think that he overplayed his hand with Elko. I think that he overplayed his hand with Chesney. It's blown up in his face. And that's really the only way to put it. And you look at who's left, like Brom's an interesting name. I mean, he's done a fine job at Louisville, but for me, it's kind of like he is what he is. Like he's got a great offense. He's going to win a couple of games he shouldn't every year because of it, but he hasn't proven that he's not going to lose games that he's not supposed to lose. And he's not necessarily like a guy who you think you bring in and you're going to win a national championship with him. And I think like if I'm Pat Kraft now, I take a deep breath and I reevaluate what I'm looking at here. Like maybe it doesn't have to be the quote unquote splash hire. Like maybe it's this one would not look good on paper, and I don't think it would happen. But if we ought to get weird, like Joe Moorhead he won more than two games at Akron, and the Penn State fans love him. But no, I'm not suggesting Joe Moorhead as a candidate, but I'm just saying, like, I think there has to be kind of an overhaul of what they're doing here, because all your top guys are gone.
Yeah. And the thing is, too, before we start naming names that aren't Joe Moorhead, maybe Joe Moorhead comes back as the OC, depending on maybe. It sure as hell ain't going to be Andy Kotelnicki.
Yeah.
As we talk about Pat Kraft and the handling of this and everything, and I agree with you. I think it was mismanaged, and I think it was maybe a little pie in the sky looking back on it. But when you go, like, I don't blame I don't blame him for swinging big. Like, I don't blame him for going into this search being like, you know what, we're going to go after Elko and Sitake. And obviously, Kalen DeBoer was floated out there for a while. Marcus Freeman was floated out there for a while. Like, I don't blame him going after those guys who have CFP possibilities. And when you do that, you kind of accept that we're probably punting on signing day, like, because these guys are going to be involved in the CFP, or at least like in that discussion up until, selection Sunday. I don't blame him for that necessarily, but you have to get it done. Is the thing. You can't miss. And when you miss, you're left with with nothing in your hands, nothing in your back pocket. And then you look around and you see, okay, well, Florida got Summerall, Auburn got Golesh. You look around and you see, like, okay, well, the top G5 options aren't available anymore. I mean, shoot, Michigan State and Kentucky fired their coaches, and then 24 hours later had their coaches in the bag. Pat Fitzgerald to Michigan State and Will Stein to Kentucky. And we'll see how those guys ultimately work out. But it's one of those where when you're a Penn State fan and you're looking around and seeing what's happening here, and we're hanging out here on day 53, still talking about no coach.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough. And it's easy and understandable to get frustrated with Pat Kraft and to get frustrated with Penn State. And I think it's like, in terms of the hope aspect of it, it's that, like, they haven't made a bad hire yet. So there's still the possibility of them making a good hire.
Yeah.
So that's the positive. The negative is that this is still going on in the first place.
Right. It's just, it's taken too long. I mean, it's evidence that Pat Kraft did not go about this the right way. I mean, even not that you wanted to be part of the Lane Kiffin saga, but he had a CFP team and he's coaching a new team right now. Like, if that was his goal, like, he didn't get it done, and that's what it boils down to. But Johnny, you mentioned signing day and how this relates. That's something we wanted to touch on, because Penn State for 11 years had a huge signing day. They do their draft in the Lash building and usually signed a pretty solid class under James Franklin. And this year, with no head coach in place, they signed two players. Jackson Ford, a good defensive end out of Malvern Prep, and Peyton Falzone, an intriguing athlete who played quarterback at Nazareth in Pennsylvania. His future, not necessarily positive that it's a quarterback in college football. It might be. He's also had quite the journey because he committed to 3 different schools during his recruitment. First, Virginia Tech and Brent Pry. Well, Pry got fired. He decommitted. He committed to Penn State and James Franklin. He did later decommit, but Franklin got fired. And then he committed to Auburn, where Hugh Freeze got fired. So now he's back in his home state. It's just, I wrote a story about him in the spring when he first committed to Penn State. And so I texted his dad, and he was like, yeah, we're just happy we found him the right fit. And it is, I mean, I think Penn State and Falzone really are perfect for each other right now because they've been through a lot. And he's already being looked at as, a couple people are calling him and Ford Penn State legends already because they're the only guys who stuck it out. They committed to the school, not the situation. But the point that I want to get across, I think that there's a lot of rightful disdain for the way that this recruiting class played out. But with that said, I think that it doesn't matter that much is kind of what I want to get to. And I think you agree with me.
Yeah, well, especially now it's going to have to not matter.
Well, true, but yes.
But I think the other end of this is if Sitake doesn't stay at BYU and he comes in, probably brings quite a bit of BYU commits and or signees that just transfer over, and also brings in, like, imports some of those players away from Provo. And that would be the case with most of the coaches that Penn State has talked to already in this process, was that signing day, of course, it's great to get players like Falzone and Ford in the door. And you mentioned doing an earlier story on Peyton. I did one on Jackson Ford back in the spring. And, it was before he even committed to Penn State. And his rise is really interesting, transferring to Malvern. going into like in between his sophomore and junior year. Really didn't I think he had one offer from Maryland, and it wasn't until he started camping a lot. And he said he remembers shaking James Franklin's hand at a camp and being like, wow, like I made it. And, of course, James Franklin no longer at Penn State, but Jackson Ford is. And he's a great kid and a really good player. And it's great that Penn State got those two guys in the door. But signing day it always felt like not as important because of whichever coach you're going to bring in, whether it's an Elko at the time or a Sitake, that they were going to bring in their commits, just like James Franklin did at Virginia Tech.
Right, exactly.
And also like via the portal, like bring in experienced guys. We'll see who they ultimately get. There are some candidates that are under consideration right now that do not have players or commits to bring in, so which would make it very, very interesting. But yeah, it was a very quiet signing day for Penn State, and we fully expected that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't even estimate how many guys are going to leave the current roster. It's probably
it's impossible. It's impossible to tell.
Right. I mean, it depends on who they hire, but if you just want to put a wild guess out there, it's probably 20 plus. And I think the team that brought in the most transfers this offseason for the 2025 year was 51 is how many transfers they brought in or something to that effect. So I think you can bank on that. And that's why it doesn't matter that much is because you really can fill out a whole lineup and even a two deep with transfers very easily. But you still got to have some of those guys. I think the one thing that maybe, I don't know, people are probably aware of it, but maybe don't think of it right away. The portal does open as well for guys who just signed this week. That is a thing. Who knows about their contractual agreements on their NIL and everything, but Julian Sayin who is potentially going to win the Heisman this year, was at Alabama, signed with Alabama, and then transferred to Ohio State in the spring. Also, there's a pretty good freshman quarterback over at Cal, Jaron Sungapolutele. Is that his name? He was signed with Oregon and came back to Cal. Like it's very possible that whoever Penn State gets as a coach will bring some players with him, some that you don't expect. If it's a guy who has college relationships, he'll probably bring some of his guys with him. If it's a guy who's completely off the wall, who knows? But I think it's bad that Penn State didn't sign a lot of players on signing day. But I also don't think that it necessarily means a whole lot for next year's roster, because you also have to remember next year's team probably ain't going to look the same in 2 years. There's going to be a ton of transfers again as this coach gets settled and figures out what's going on. It's just like there are so many other factors that this signing class just I don't put a whole lot of stock into the fact that they only signed 2. Now, I do think, Johnny, that there's a bigger discussion here as to why I've had a couple people reach out to me about it. I've seen some discussion online. Why Penn State had so many more decommitments when they did not have a head coach in place versus a school like Florida, a school like LSU. I think they only had 5 or 6, whereas Penn State had 23. And it's kind of why James Franklin got fired in the first place. It's not the only reason by any means, but it's up there because Penn State had an approach where it offered money to high school kids. It tried to be competitive, but Penn State was never going to set the market on high school recruits. And the way that James Franklin ran this program was transformational, not transactional, right? And whether that's the right approach or not from a moral standpoint, it's not always the right approach for some of the top prospects who are out there. And when you get to this situation where you don't have a coach, that's why some of these kids are going elsewhere. I mean, it's not the only reason. Some of them have their own personal situations that they want to go to other places and whatnot. But, when the money's not there and there's money elsewhere, that's part of it. And it also is the way that Penn State and James Franklin went after it in the transfer portal. He continued to say, we're not a big transfer portal team. And that's why they only brought in 5, 6, 7, 10 players at most in the portal every year. They were looking to fill holes. They weren't looking to win based on the transfer portal. And that's not what it is in college football right now. That's not what Pat Kraft wants. And so that's kind of why you see what this signing day is. And I think that's why you're going to see a lot of changes no matter who the next guy is at Penn State.
Yeah. to just add on that, that's part of the reason why I got fired
Yeah.
was that, disconnect,
Mhm.
between James Franklin and Pat Kraft. And just to add on that a little bit, though, in terms of why more players, more recruits left Penn State than other situations. Well, when you recruit these guys and you preach the transformational, not transactional, well, the guy who's going to provide you the transformational experience is now like 6 hours or however many hours down the road. And, a lot of these guys are regional prospects, whether they're from Virginia, PA, New Jersey, like he's close enough, and he'll provide you that transformational experience just at a different school. So while obviously these kids come on campus and they walk into Beaver Stadium and they're blown away by a whiteout, ultimately a lot of these guys commit to the coach and commit to the vision. And that vision didn't go out to California or down to Florida, not quite in the backyard, but, a manageable drive. And that's part of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into let's take the next step here, Johnny. I think that's good talk on signing day and everything. I mean, there's still time in February for guys to sign, but it's
Which
just
is important, which is really important.
it is
really important. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think with how large this coaching carousel was, how this spanned, like there were so many open jobs this year. I think there might be more signings in February in this cycle than we're used to seeing, at least more high profile signings, higher profile. So if Penn State doesn't have a head coach in place by the February signing window, we'll just all have a group therapy session. But I'm pretty sure that'll happen. So let's move forward. Let's talk about some names, Johnny, because a few have been thrown out there. I'm seeing in our chat here, we've got a great live chat going. I'd love to see everybody having fun in there. Having fun might be a relative term, but there's some Matt Campbell. There's some Willie Fritz. Brian Dable went crazy online. He wore that Penn State hoodie. His son used to be a GA, I believe, or a manager. He was here. He was on the Penn State program. And also a name that I in our chat right now that I have never seen put online. Ryan Day. I don't I think that everybody's getting a little restless and just looking for anything. Also Matt Campbell, I think that's a hot one right now from Iowa State. He's been a hot name in coaching searches for years, and when Penn State's kind of out of options, he's probably attractive. But Johnny, what are you thinking right now?
I'm thinking that if Matt Campbell is hired, like if you told me on October 13th when James Franklin was fired that Matt Campbell was going to be Penn State's head coach, I would have been like, all right, cool. Maybe like a slight shrug, but like, cool. Like Pat Kraft did his job. He got a head coach with a ton of experience doing more with less at a program that never won before he got there.
Right.
And he has an abundance of, like I said, abundance of experience. There's a reason why he's been so heavily coveted in the past, and not just by college programs, but NFL teams as well have talked to Matt Campbell and have been interested in Matt Campbell. And Penn State should be interested in him as well. I put out a coaching search reset, take a deep breath. Here are the new candidates, or at least some of them, this morning, a few hours ago. And I didn't number them in terms of like who I would prefer as looking at Penn State, seeing what they need. But the first name that I wrote down was Matt Campbell. And I just think that you can salvage this certainly by hiring Matt Campbell. That would be my number one guy right now. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I think the Brian Dable thing was a bit smoky for like the few hours after.
Let's talk about Brian Dable, because the hoodie, first of all, the hoodie.
I like your tweet. Now the hoodie seems kind of messed up.
Yeah, except Seth Rogen in Step Brothers didn't say messed up. He said effed up. And it's just I don't see Brian Dable working as Penn State's head coach. he might be Penn State's head coach, but I don't see it working.
Yeah.
And that feels like we got screwed by Sitake. Let's circle back to all the guys we've talked to. Let's talk to someone who is definitely available and doesn't have anything going on, and see if he'd be interested, and see if we could hammer something out that kind of break glass in case of emergency. That's what Brian Daboll feels like to me at this point.
Yeah, I think look, Brian Daboll is an interesting coach. Like he hasn't coached his last football game after being fired from the New York Giants. Like he's had great offenses. He's a good offensive mind. He won a national championship at Alabama when he made a stint in college football. He would be like, I'm not reporting this in any way, but like, what if Penn State wants to hire him as offensive coordinator? That'd be interesting. I think I'd be all over it. Like the guy's going to get a job somewhere doing something, but as the head coach, it does not make sense to me. And it just like, I think it was one of those knee-jerk reactions where Sitake says no and Brian Daboll's available. He's kind of a big name. And Pat Kraft is kind of thinking, I gotta get something. You know, I gotta get something. I gotta hit. This would at least get people talking. Like if whatever. I think if we would have heard Penn State's targeting him within like 24 hours, maybe 48 hours of Sitake saying no, Brian Daboll's on the table. But I think now that things have kind of calmed down, Kraft's taken a chance to say, all right, maybe that doesn't make a lot of sense. Because I do think that would have been kind of just a knee-jerk emotional reaction kind of thing.
Maybe that wouldn't work out. Maybe the tuxedos are a little effed up right now. It's one of those where this is a guy who obviously worked with Josh Allen with the Bills, and then if you want to play the connect the dots deal, Terry Pagula owning the Bills, being a Penn State guy, you could connect those dots. He has 1 year of meaningful college football experience, and that's at Alabama when he was working with Nick Saban, who Nick Saban is the ultimate program builder, mastermind CEO. Like Daboll had to go in there and call plays.
Mm-hmm.
So the lack of experience, and then, you have to bring in an entire staff in terms you can't just pull them all from college from the NFL, because you have to have guys who understand college football.
Right.
It would be interesting. It would be really interesting. I would love to watch and see how it played out. But yeah, he was on the list of candidates that I placed because he is in the mix. But I wouldn't personally see that working out. Just like I wouldn't for a couple of other candidates too.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just to follow up on your Matt Campbell, look, Iowa State was not a good football program when he took over. Since 2000, they won 9 games once and never won more than 7. He has won 8 games 3 times, 9 games once, and 11 games once since 2016. Like the dude's really turned things around there. I think, like you said, I mean, if you told me on October 13th that he was going to be the guy, I might not have been like applauding Pat Kraft for making a great hire, but it also would have been like, yeah, sure. Like, it's at least different. Like the James Franklin era, the model, the way, his philosophy, it all went stale. As we've talked about many times on this podcast, that wasn't happening anymore. James Franklin was done, no matter what. A lot of fans are saying Penn State made a mistake. Pat Kraft doesn't see it that way. A lot of Penn State fans don't see it that way. I don't see it that way. I think it was time for something new. Matt Campbell is something new. It might not be the home run splash that people wanted, but I think it's fine. If that's the guy, I think it's fine.
And a smaller bit on Matt Campbell too is that generally speaking, Iowa State's had good quarterback and wide receiver play under his leadership during his tenure. Look at the Houston Texans. They got 3 receivers from Iowa State. Like, I'm not saying the Houston Texans are very good. I think they might be leading the AFC South right now, or at least in contention.
I think so. Yeah, because the Colts have kind of fallen apart. But
yeah, this isn't a Colts podcast, but Danny Dimes giveth and Danny Dimes taketh away. Yeah. Really quick on the Franklin bit, because this is something that, and not just from like Penn State fans who may or may not be panicking, but some in the national media, I know like Mike Greenberg and, guys who really just aren't plugged in and just kind of spout off and say whatever the hell they want, are pulling you never should have fired James Franklin. Look at you now. Guys, like there were many reasons to fire James Franklin. Lisa Witch is that not Lisa Witch, but the fact that like you're 3-3 and you lose as 20-point favorites to UCLA and Northwestern when you enter the season as a national title contender and like number 2 overall in the preseason poll, and it all falls apart. And it falls apart because for a myriad of reasons, a myriad of issues that all started at the top. So let's stop pretending that like James Franklin should not have been fired. Let's stop that.
Right. And also a lot of people in the chat right now are saying like X name, Matt Campbell, whoever is not an upgrade from James Franklin, or X name is a downgrade from James Franklin or is a step down. And I'm like, I don't think it's about upgrades or step downs. I mean, maybe that's the goal, but it's about different. Like it wasn't working anymore. There was that alignment that James Franklin talked about for a really long time. It was gone by midseason this year. Pat Kraft was not aligned with James Franklin in the way he was running this football program anymore. Maybe James Franklin is a better coach than whoever they're getting, but that's not really the entire point. I mean, it is, but it's also not. Like this thing had run its course. It's time for something else.
You needed something like if your goal is to win a national title. Look, if your goal is to go 9-3, 10-2, then fine, hang on to James Franklin forever.
Right.
If your goal is to come close to getting over the hump, but never getting over the hump, then go ahead, hang on to James Franklin forever. Yeah. So like, I know Bob Chesney, even like in a vacuum, there would have been a lot of fans being like, really, the JMU coach?
Right. You can make an argument. Right.
This guy, like there would have been a lot of people, regardless of who they hired, even if they pulled off Kalen DeBoer, there would be fans who'd be like, really, the guy who's losing at Alabama, we want him. Yes. There's I understand that it's not apples and apples, it's apples and oranges. And we saw Penn State's best attempt to win a national title under James Franklin blew up in his face. Mm-hmm. They had XYZ players coming back. They had everything. And it blew up in the most spectacularly terrible way possible. And that's who you're like, oh, well, we should have kept him. No, come on, guys. Like, let's put that to rest.
Yeah, this is a what have you done for me lately industry. James Franklin did a lot of great things at Penn State, but with the
not to mitigate any of that. Not to, we have talked about that. Not to mitigate any of that.
Yeah, we've got a really big audience, and all of you may not usually hop on these podcasts, but we spent plenty of time in the aftermath of James Franklin's firing, complimenting the 11 years he spent here, the ways that he increased facilities, money for his staff, yada, yada, yada. He did great things at Penn State, but it just, like I said, it's what have you done for me lately? The alignment was no longer there. Like it ran its course. It was over. Hiring a new head coach, though Pat Kraft has, as we said at the start of this show, kind of overplayed his hand. Things have gone off the rails. This was still a fine decision to move on from James Franklin, and getting a new head coach is about different. It's about trying something new. It's about potential, because you saw James Franklin's potential and it was done at Penn State. Which I guess is a good segue, Johnny, for us to kind of wrap this thing up and tie it all together with talking about Pat Kraft and how this defines his legacy and the perception of him right now.
Before we do that, Max, well, sure. I guess we can tie it in. I was just gonna address some of the other names that are out there, because somehow we have gone almost 44 minutes and not mentioned the name Terry Smith.
Yes, actually, good point. Yep, good point.
Let's talk about that a little bit, and not just Terry, but some of the other names that could be out there. The names that I wrote down on my candidates list at this point: Manny Diaz is one, former Penn State defensive coordinator. Obviously has a history with Pat Kraft. Kraft hired him at Temple, and then 2 weeks later, Manny left to take the Miami job. But he is as well respected by the players and staff as you could be, and in terms of retaining pieces, could be a big part of that. And I like Manny as a dude. He's a fiery guy. Over the course of his 3 years in Miami and 2 seasons now at Duke, he has a 37-24 record, doing more with less at Duke. Ended up convincing Darian Mensah with a big NIL package, their Tulane's quarterback, to come to Duke. So he's shown the ability to get a high-level quarterback in the door. I like Manny Diaz. Dan Mullen, just kind of a guy that's out there. He did a pretty good job at Mississippi State. Not so much at Florida. Took a few years
start
off.
at Florida.
Sorry.
He had a good start at Florida.
He did, yeah. Took a few years off, went to ESPN, rejoined the coaching ranks this season, 10-2 at UNLV this season. Drexel Hill, PA native, went to Ursinus, had been a candidate in the past, like even going back to 2011. So that's a name that could bubble up. We talk about Pat Kraft connections. Go back to Boston College, Jeff Hafley, who was the head coach at BC. Kraft extended him there. Hafley ended up leaving the college game to join the Green Bay Packers as their defensive coordinator. A big part of that is kind of where the landscape was going in college football with NIL, eventually rev share. Would he want to come back to that world? Not sure. But he's doing a damn good job in Green Bay. And talk about a guy with ties, former Pitt assistant staffer, New Jersey native, would make some sense. And then we have Terry Smith. And I think Terry Smith, like we can talk about Pat Kraft and Terry Smith kind of in tandem, intertwined, maybe oil and water, because it's one of those where if you're hiring Terry Smith to be your head coach permanently, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree, Max, but I think you will, and a lot of people do as well. It's like an admission of failure, but that the Pat Kraft search did not work. You know, that it just did not work. And I had a column, I guess it was a couple weeks back now. It was after the Nebraska win when the hire Terry groundswell of support really started with the signs and everything. That if you were going to ultimately hire, like the point of this search, the point of firing James Franklin was not to hire the guy that's already in the building and the guy who is Franklin's top assistant. And I still feel that way. I still feel too that Terry Smith probably will not be Penn State's head coach.
Yep.
But if that is the case, then you're probably looking at big changes in the athletic department, AKA Pat Kraft.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think honestly, you could probably do worse than Terry Smith.
You could, but
I don't think that this discussion we're having is a reflection of our opinions on Terry Smith as a coach. I think it's a reflection on the Pat Kraft get up on front of the podium and say, we're going to hire a guy who's going to be able to win a national championship with the elite resources we're giving him, and saying, oh, so you did all that just to hire James Franklin's right-hand man? Like, that's kind of what this is. I think Terry Smith is a fantastic football coach. I think he did really good things as the interim head coach. I'm curious that if he wanted to be a head coach somewhere, what it would look like. I don't know if that's the case. I think he may want to stay on Penn State staff in an assistant role. A lot can happen, but I don't think that he should be the head coach at Penn State just because the optics are not good, and that's not what Pat Kraft fired James Franklin to do. We've said that before, and I agree with you. Like, I think that would represent a failure in this coaching search, and it has nothing to do with Terry. It has everything to do with Pat Kraft and the way this is played out.
Well, it has a little bit to do with
– It has a little bit to do with Terry, but yeah.
I understand why some fans would be really attached to giving Terry Smith the job at this point, because, you know, we've seen Penn State as a program throughout the whole Sitake nonsense, or not nonsense, but really like everything, right? That how in shambles everything is and how embarrassing it is. And Terry Smith very clearly cares a lot about Penn State. He cares a lot about Penn State. So it's understandable why, you know, if all these people don't want Penn State, and you have a guy in the building that desperately wants Penn State, right, why that would be an attractive draw. This guy has coached 6 games as a head coach, and under interim coach conditions and circumstances, which we see all the time when a head coach is fired and an interim takes over, and they're able to galvanize a locker room and, you know, the block out the noise and us against the world. Like, that is tried and true interim coach, you know, formula for success. And they beat 3 bad teams. Like they beat 3 bad teams. And so that was my argument a couple weeks ago, why you don't hire this guy based on this emotional pull and based on now 6 games of evidence. Whereas you look at, you know, Matt Campbell, Jeff Hatt, like all these guys that we've previously mentioned have like real college football head coaching experience, or at least not Dable, but that's why I said I don't think it would necessarily work. So yeah, I just don't think Terry Smith will be the coach. I don't think he necessarily should be the coach, but I understand the emotions behind it, and the optics behind it from a fan who may want Terry to be the head coach.
Yeah, it's a complicated discussion. And I
Very,
think
very complicated. And Terry complicated it by beating Nebraska. You know,
yeah,
like
yeah.
if they finished 3-9, this is not even a discussion. But that's kind of the other side of the coin, where it's like, okay, well, if he finished 3-9 and didn't beat these three teams, would we be talking about Terry Smith? No. So the fact that he did beat those three teams, we should be talking about, like,
Right.
That's where the disconnect is for me.
Yeah, it's a complex situation. I think the best ending for everybody would be Pat Kraft gets a different head coach and is able to keep Terry around on a hefty raise. I think that's the ideal scenario here, because you want to keep that guy in the building. The players love him, fans love him, alumni love him, as they should. Great coach, loves Penn State, easy to work with, great motivator, ton of great qualities, but no head coaching experience. Maybe a little too close to the James Franklin model, when that had gone stale. And it doesn't make sense as the next head coach, but you definitely want to keep him around. And I think, Johnny, that like we've kind of talked about it all the way throughout this 51.5 minutes, but like this is not a good look for Pat Kraft and his legacy at Penn State. Like, he's not going to get a chance to hire a second head coach if this doesn't work out.
Right. And that's a part of the Terry Smith equation, is that if you hire a guy who has so little head coaching experience, and a lot of fans have thrown out the idea of like, give it to Terry for a year or two, see how it works, and if it doesn't work, then you hit the reset button, you hire someone else. If you're Pat Kraft, you're not making that hire.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if Terry Smith is the permanent head coach of Penn State, then it is an admission of failure on this search. Now, I'm sure a lot of Penn State fans would say, screw it. Like, who cares? Fire the guy. Like,
right.
he embarrassed us.
Right.
But if you're Pat Kraft, and not only do you want to keep your job, but if you're Neely Bendapudi, the president, and you're members of the board, and like you hire this guy to be the AD, to not only at this juncture hire a head coach, but run a $700 million Beaver Stadium renovation and handle everything else in this athletic department, like, everyone's neck is on the line that Pat Kraft get this right. So, like, they're not just going to give up on the guy because he didn't get Kalani Sitake. And it would be an admission of like, hey, we really screwed the pooch here, if Terry Smith is ultimately the hire. And not only that, but the hire after signing day, when he really didn't have much of a leg to stand on when trying to convince these recruits to stay at Penn State.
Yeah, and I will say, like, he's not getting fired now. You're not firing him before he hires this head coach. You might fire him quickly after. Who knows? Because this has gone so poorly. But he has an interesting role, legacy, reputation, I guess, because he's led a lot of really good things at Penn State. I mean, across the whole of their varsity sports, I think they won 3 national championships last year. Wrestling, volleyball, and something else that I'm not remembering. It might have only been 2, but hockey also went to the Frozen Four. I mean, they got Gavin McKenna. Like, he's overseeing a lot of really good things in the athletic department as a whole. But even if you look back at his time at Temple and Boston College, making coaching hires hasn't always been his forte. I mean, the Manny Diaz thing blew up in his face. Jeff Hafley was his guy at Boston College, and he never won more than 7 games. Like, I think Pat Kraft has done a lot of good things. I think he still deserves the opportunity to make this hire. It hasn't gone well to this point, but this is kind of his thing. I mean, I think he's only made I'm trying to rack my brain right now. I did not write this down. I wasn't necessarily expecting the conversation to go all the way this way, but I'm trying to rack my brain. I think he's only made one like high profile hire since being the Penn State AD. And I think that's baseball's Mike Gambino, who is doing a very good job. That was a great hire. Mike Gambino's done a really nice job, but
You
he
also
hasn't.
you have Rhodes.
Oh, Mike Rhodes, of course, yeah. Which that one's kind of still being played out. I'd say
Yeah.
last year was a down year that you had higher expectations for, but he got Caden Mingo. Maybe he'll get Dylan Mingo, his little brother, in the recruitment. He found Yannick Conan Niederhauser, first round pick in program history. Like that one's the book's probably still a little bit out on Mike Rhodes. So like
I think it's fair to criticize the handling of the Micah Shrewsbury situation, which a lot of fans who actually care about Penn State men's basketball, which there are a healthy bit that do not whatsoever. But those fans who do care about Penn State men's basketball will bring up the fact that that was mishandled potentially.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that could have been a kind of forebearer, a little bit foreboding of what is happening now. I don't blame him too much for the Temple and Boston College stuff, because you're Manny Diaz and you were the D coordinator at Miami, and then Miami calls you 2 weeks later, like, what are you going to do? You're Temple. And then BC's BC. Like, Penn State's a different beast. Yeah. And like, for good and bad, I guess, if you're Pat Kraft, like, in terms of handling that, like this is a big boy decision. And he hasn't handled it right so far. No. He hasn't. We're in agreement there. Very, very intrigued to see how it handles itself, or how he handles it with the help of the rest of the administration over the coming days and weeks. Max, I don't think we're going to be waiting until February, as you mentioned, for a.
God, I hope not.
I mean, at this point, like, we're thinking probably a week, maybe.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, there's no rush.
No, there's not at this point, because there are no other high-profile openings anymore. You're not competing with anybody. Maybe that was the plan all along. It's just us, I don't know. It's interesting. A week, or I don't know. You probably don't see anything before conference championships happen this weekend, I would guess. But who knows? Because this thing takes many twists and turns. Yeah, just to wrap up the Pat Kraft thing, like, as you kind of mentioned, in the way that we're going to remember these things, like, we're going to remember the Crumble Cookies and the CEO keeping Sitake around. Like, we're not going to remember all the good things that Penn State's athletic department has done in the past 2-3 years under Pat Kraft, all the other national championships. Penn State football is the big ticket item. We're going to remember who he hires, how poorly this all went, and how it ends up. Whether it's good or bad, this is his legacy at Penn State, and he's staking his reputation on it.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more, man. We'll see where it goes, because obviously the last few days have been, trying on Penn State fans. Whether it's a tweet involving Seth Rogen or SpongeBob, I've tried to bring a little bit of levity to it. Like, you kind of. Like, I mean, the Crumble Cookie thing, what are we going to do, right? But, it has not gone to plan. But we'll be covering it every step of the way. We'll see what ultimately happens. I'm fully expecting, Max, that, and obviously I cover the Eagles too, and they had a game Black Friday. They have a game Monday night against the Chargers out in LA. I won't be there, but I'm fully expecting, while I'm talking to Nick Sirianni or something, that this is when this is all going to go down.
Easily. That's how it works here.
Nick Sirianni and Matt Campbell, by the way, former Mount Union teammates in college. So maybe one day I'll get to ask Nick Sirianni about Penn State's new hire, if it's Matt Campbell. Maybe not.
Yeah. But as you said, we're going to be here through it all. We had a great audience today for this live show. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of good discussion going on in the chat. I did see here, as we wrap up, somebody asked if we're going to have a live show next week. That's the plan. We try to be here every Thursday. Usually it's me and Johnny. Bob Flounders has hopped in here and there. We roll with the punches. The only thing that will keep us from having a live show at noon next Thursday is if there is a new head coach press conference at noon next Thursday, which I'm not saying that there will be, but that is probably the only reason we wouldn't have a show. So,
and everyone in this chat will be, waiting on bated breath to hear what Pat Kraft has to say, if that's the case. us. So
exactly. So they're not gonna be wanting to hear what we have to say. That's for sure.
yeah. Yeah. Just to reinforce it though, like if anyone joined today for the first time because of everything that's happening, we've been doing these Thursday at noon throughout the entire season, and no plans on stopping. So yeah, join us next week. We'll see where we're at.
Join us, like Darth Vader. Join us. Yeah. But yeah, this has been the Blue White Breakdown live session here on a Thursday afternoon. Long one today, a lot to get to. Coaching search, National Signing Day, all that good stuff in between. We'll be here next week. Appreciate you tuning in here on Penn Live. Make sure you go subscribe to the show, subscribe to our YouTube, follow on any podcast platform you might be listening on, and go subscribe to PennLive.com because there's a lot to still come. Take care.